as you can tell by the title, man, we're going to be talking about this, man. The Nuestra Familia and Mexican Mafia's influence and how these gangs have been able to evolve, okay, under their direction, under their guidance, and how the gangbanging lifestyle has immediately changed once both these groups got immediately involved in their sub-factions. Okay, you know, I talked to a lot of individuals about the life, right, from all different sides, man. And one thing that was kind of interesting that I found was regarding the Sureños from down south and the Mexican Mafia's agendas that came in the 90s when they came out there and they enforced different types of policies, the taxation from hoods, the no more drive-by policy, and so forth. Which, if you kind of look at it, man, the NF did the same thing years later. Okay, now their influence upon these hoods started to pay more tribute to the EME. Now, when you look at traditional things, right, between like the 70s and 80s, little was really said about the 80s regarding the EME and NF. Both organizations went through some major turmoil, some major cases and so forth in the 70s and 80s. They were put in isolated blocks. They were isolated from the prison population, and it really had a strong impact for years. Okay, now when the EME started to enforce these new regulations out there in the streets, previous for years, man, and I know some people, Sureños, are going to have a different opinion, but I talked to people who were part of that push at that time. I talked to people who were immediately involved in the taxation part. Previously, from like the 70s to up to that point in the 90s, most of the time you would see the 13 was a representation of marijuana, okay? Now, it doesn't mean that there wasn't Sureños. Yes, there were Sureños. But most of the Sureños that were the ones that were going into the system, they were going into prison, they identified themselves as Sureños, and when they got out to the streets, they went back to their hood. There was limited involvement and interactions with emeros at that time. It doesn't mean that there wasn't certain hoods that had working relationships and were doing things, but it was a little bit less involvement as opposed to now. Okay, now when all this started to occur, man, that's when you had different hoods out there that were trying to push independence, kind of being independent and taxing the hoods. But the EME came in and intervened in all of that and had everybody fall under their bandera, right? And this is where you basically you started to see Sureños representing that 13 and paying tribute to the EME. Before, for years, man, that 13 had nothing really to do with being a Sureño. It was just something that was a common theme that stood for marijuana. You know what I'm saying? I know some of you guys are going to have a little bit difference of opinion, but from the people that I know that were deeply involved at that time, this is what's been stated to me. Okay? So that's when you started to have that different tribute and paying homage and representing 13 as being a Sureño. Everything previously before this point, yes, there were Sureños in the system, but when they got out, they just went back to their hood. The 13 didn't represent the Sur at that time. And it's almost the same thing that started to occur with the NF and Norteños, you know, when they stepped out. Okay, both particular groups have the same type of focus as far as generating money and controlling territory. Okay, and for years, both groups tried to independently do this by using their own manpower out there in the streets, and would have very select few people that they would consider associates. And these would be usually people that they entrusted or been involved in or whatnot. The 1990s changed everything, you know, and it became a working relationship between both groups. You know, you're giving these hoods that have been traditionally, yes, there's people out there getting money. There's people out there hustling for years. You know, you have to survive. But a lot of times, man, the whole mentality at this time frame was about gangbanging. You know, these new implementations of taxation and working for these groups changed everything to where now you're giving these hoods an opportunity to generate income. Therefore, it's been all about money. It has evolved with both these groups. And at the same thing, when they enforced the red on red policy back in 97, and they started to change their involvement as far as having regular hoods contribute to the regiments. Whereas before the NF, prime example, the indictments in San Jose in 1990, it was all NF in structure. And they would only target certain individuals that were out there balling to shake them down. You know, this changed everything. And see, now you have, like I said, they're two sides to the same coin. They have the same agenda, they have a lot of similarities, and they have some type of different ways of executing it. You know, the MA has been able to have people out there represent these hoods on behalf of that ML collecting the taxes and pushing forth that agenda, as well as aligning maybe these areas with their resources, their connects, and so forth. NF has been able to do the same thing. They've been able to have certain regiments contribute monthly, or someone within that hood that steps out that's been delegated responsibility to run that region or regiment and continue to build in the income. So see, this is where I'm saying the influence has came. They have enabled these gangs to turn into benefit financially from illicit activities. Now, before you guys misconstrue anything, yes, all these hoods probably had people that were involved in the illicit transactions and getting money for years. I mean, that's just a way of life in the criminal underworld and element. But from me, from a personal standpoint too, right, it was less involvement. More homeboys were focused about out there gang banging, fucking partying, and shooting up their rivals. Now it changed course of action to where it came about generating money, being productive, and getting that recognition from the big homies. I mean, both particular groups. You know, and see, what you have here is you have both groups giving these sub-faction gangs out there, what you would call like the subordinates, basically, the street level gang members, an opportunity to generate income. Whereas for years, there was less opportunities for these hoods to generate money. You know, you'd have a homeboy maybe in your hood or two that had a family member that had a plug, or one homeboy that decided to ball. He would show some love now, but this changed everything. This gave regular street level members an opportunity to partake in functions with the backing of their mob. You know what I mean? And that's where these organizations kind of are similar in the influence that they've had on these streets, is they gave these hoods an opportunity to where they don't have to sit there stagnated and not be productive. You know, the areas, like I said, eras up until like the 90s, man, gangbanging was gangbanging. You know what I'm saying? It just was what it was. Even the early 90s. The evolution here was the influence of these groups, giving the guidance and directions to where it wasn't just about fucking gangbanging or taking out rivals. I worked out there for years with the NF, for years. Not one time was our focus ever about taking out the opposition or influencing the youngsters to take out tornadoes. It was always about generating money and about utilizing our resources, our manpower, to generate the income. Therefore, they always had that philosophy that if we can control the drug market, the trade, and give every hood an opportunity to benefit from us, we're letting everybody win. Therefore, we're getting control of these areas, and we have influence. You know, it's kind of interesting because some of these hoods down south are almost operate like regiments up north. You know, they have their own, their whole hierarchy is a little bit different. Here you have at the top, you have the individual that's in control of that area. And it's a pyramid effect where the low level members are making a big amount of income on behalf of this middle, and they're all kicking up. You know what I'm saying? To where he's generating enough money, but everybody down below him, you know what I'm saying, is still getting their money. The NF, the difference with that is the supplies are coming from up here all the way down, but the bigger money's going up here. The contributions, the taxation, and so forth. You know, both have a different way of generating income, but traditionally it's always going to be the drug trade. Some areas are able to tax certain individuals. The rap game is a new thing too now that they're taxing people. You know, for years the NF used to never use the word taxing, and they still don't. They call it a contribution. You're going to contribute, but it's just the same form or fashion of taxing. You know, and like I said, man, if you really look at both groups, they've married each other in similarities. You know, like as far as like the bringing people back. Both groups will allow certain individuals a chance to clear their name and come back if they pay a certain fine. You know, and see, so the end game has always been the financial benefits that you can get from your manpower. You know, and people don't really talk about this enough. You know, that they've allowed the transition to the gang culture in California to be about focused on money. They're giving every hood that opportunity by being under their bandana, being able to have access to their resources. And it's a, like I said, it's a win-win situation. Previous 80s, how many hoods were really benefiting on behalf of the organizations? From like, say like 92 down, not many. You know, you had to fend for your own out there in the streets. You were lucky if you had a homeboy or two that were actually getting money. You know, now it's a little bit different. Every homeboy, you have like 18-year-old kids that are, oh, I'm assisting the regiment. Or you know what I mean? I'm assisting the big homies. And see, this is where the evolution, like I said, the growth of everything, you know. And don't get it wrong. Some people are going to say, oh, yeah, we've always been getting money. Yes, I get that. But things have extremely changed now to where the benefits of working for these groups, it's a give and take relationship. They're benefiting off you, but they're giving you an opportunity to benefit your hood, you know? And it's a smart move, you know what I'm saying, to have the manpower, the resources. Because that was one of our selling points when I was working for the regiment, was when we get at certain connects that were like plugged in across the border or whatnot, that were doing transactions and business in our area, we would sit there. This was our sales pitch, you know? We're here on behalf of the woo, woo, woo. You know what I mean? We get what you're doing. We're very aware of everything that goes on in our area. You know what I'm saying? We have the manpower. All of Santa Clara County, we have the foot soldiers to push your product. Rather than you take all the heat, give us the work, we got the foot soldiers to push it. And 9 times out of 10, they would work with us. You know? Anyways, yeah, I was kind of like toying with the idea about looking at their influence and how they've been able to allow all these groups to change course. You know what I mean? It's about the money, period. With all these groups, it's not about really taking out a rival. Those rivalries are usually personal vendettas, or they're moving people out of those who are impeding on their terrain, their territory. As we discussed previously with some of the issues that were going on down south with the Africanos and Sureño groups. It wasn't nothing racial, like I said. It was an act of business. Some people tried to turn it into a racial thing, but it really wasn't. Up north, you know what I mean? The influence in these barrios and hoods. You know, I've heard different things that in San Jose, they have every barrio trying to contribute a certain amount of money every month. And therefore, they also have access to all the resources that are provided for them. That's why you're having so many sub-indictments. When you have these certain major indictments, like the new one, Operation Quiet Storm, you had 2 gangs out there that were associated with the organization being indicted. Why? Because someone within those groups was working with a regiment that benefited their whole hood. You know? See, that's the change of direction now that we're seeing. And it's been happening for like the last 15, 16 years. But it all started taking root in the 90s. You know? I think the MA started to take the initiative first when they started to have all those juntas and implement the new policies and so forth. That was about gaining control and territorial rights in their mind by utilizing hoods. Whereas before, they may have had interactions with certain hoods. Yeah, they may have had certain people doing their bidding, but it was less strictly enforced. There was less expectations. Now everybody's coming under the crack whips of their authority. Same thing with the NF. You know, look at the indictments that occurred in San Jose and all these other areas. Those were all issues that were addressed by NF or structure members, not no sub-faction norteños. Now, you're including all these sub-factions, you know. That's like one of the key reasons for the GUN, you know. They say it was to promote unity and to target Sureños. Yeah, I get that, man. But it was more, the underlying factors was to generate income. They knew if they could unite every hood under their bandera, you know, under their umbrella, that you have a whole working field of resources that's going to continue to generate income for the O. It's a smart move. You know, it's a valuable move, you know. And, you know, like I said, man, and that's why you have less extreme issues within some of these groups as far as, you know, trying to take out certain individuals. It's always been bad for business. If someone got to go, they're going to go. But the more of the focal point, like I said, was to utilize each other. You know, you're giving these hoods under your name the benefit of tax, the benefit of your resources, which is the dope game, to give them an opportunity to make money. And in return, they're making you money. You know what I'm saying? With less, less exposure, you know what I'm saying, by those that are higher members. But there's too often, man, a lot of these members that are within both these groups like to put themselves out there. You know what I mean? You know, I don't know why. I think it's better to isolate yourself, have the right people in place, and let them do all the work. But too often not, they want to get involved because that ego gets in the way. You know, so it's kind of a trippy game, man. You really got to take a look at it, man. And it's been going on for years. You know, the course of directions really changed. Both groups were very silent in the 80s. The 90s, that whole new push was pushed. And now you have what you have now, which is 2 big organizations that have control over all these street gangs that fall under their vendetta, you know? And that's why you're seeing indictments from both groups every like 6 months, different hoods and stuff like that. You know, whereas years before, you didn't have street gangs getting indicted on a high level federal RICO Act and so forth because there was limited association. If you had a big homie, yeah, you paid tribute to that big homie back in the days. You know, you kick in some money, and that gave you fucking leeway if anything ever went wrong with you, or if you needed someone to vouch for you. Oh yeah, I got him. You know, now it's all about basically running organized activities out there. It's about getting that money, about getting that green. It's less worried about getting at these oppositions. That's the last thing that needs to be done. You know, and I get to speak for this because I was out there when we were first pushing those agendas and trying to not, I'm not going to say infiltrate, but trying to have them work under us to give less attention. So we would sit there and go out there and get at certain hoods. Like I had ties to BRS back in the days. I had ties to Metal Fair. I had ties to my hood, you know, and therefore if they're tied into me, they're going to be contributing something, whether it's getting the dough from us or they're paying a monthly fee or they're just assisting. And see, it's a valuable relationship, and it's allowed these gangs to evolve into what you're seeing now, you know. So, I mean, like, really think about it, man. Like, the evolution is that. The influence is that. The impact is that. And therefore, you have all these, like, you're hearing less and less about the cause and struggle with the North Daniel Collective. You have more people worried about, oh, are you plugged into the regiment or not? Are you active? Are you functioning out here? You know what I mean? The same way with the fellas from down south. You know, people like to throw names. I'm tied in with this big homie. This is what's going on. Because everybody wants to feel some type of importance that they're involved in something. And see, this is you know, it's gonna be the same type of a recycled event. The same consequences are gonna happen until people decide to make certain changes. You know, and that's why you're seeing a lot more different types of dealings, because everybody sees the whole focal point of like, look, instead of being at war with each other, whether on prison or on the streets, it's more lucrative for all involved if we focus strictly on generating incomes for our particular groups. You know what I mean? There's enough pie out there for everybody to eat. And everybody's starting to understand that. You know? But anyways, just a thought, man, a real quick spill, man. I'm pretty sure there's a whole lot of other points I could elaborate on. I just wanted to focus on the transition of change to where both these particular groups started to have a lot more influence on the streets, as opposed to like the 80s and 90s, early 90s. Early 90s is when it started to kick in more with the Sureños. That's when you started seeing the representation of the Trece, you know, meaning Sud. And I know a lot of you guys are going to have an opinion about that, man, but I talked to people who were around at that time that were enforcing these policies. And they said previously before, if you were in the system, yeah, you were a Sureño because you were from down south, you were from this hood. But most of the time that Trece meant from marijuana. It didn't mean anything else. The tribute and homage came later when they started to enforce them strictly under their umbrella, which was in the 90s. 80s, 90s, around that time. You know, the same thing with the NF. You know, you see more homeboys starting to represent on behalf of the NF. You know, during my time era, we didn't have no associations or affiliations with the NF. We was out there trying to kill each other. We was in the county jail getting off with each other. That was the way of life. Next thing you know, 4 years later, you have all the red on red crimes being charged, and every homeboy is taking the initiative to assist these regiments somehow. Everybody somehow is being involved, which has led to a lot more indictments, a lot more RICO acts, you know, but I guess that's just the way of life. And we're going to see where this changes now, because with everybody out the shoe, right, it's giving people more access to the streets, more access to those that are paroling, you know. So we're going to see what type of influence that has in evolving both these groups, because up until like the late 90s, 2000s, it was very rare that so many people would be involved in these activities. Now everybody's being involved. Those young kids out there, they're still in high school, man. They're assisting sometimes their hood on behalf of the O, and they don't even realize it, you know. Anyways, I thought I'd talk about it. I'm sure there's a whole different perspective and views that you guys can go about it, man. But, you know, the NF, you know, they have a whole different type of you know, chain of command. They have a constitution, they have laws and so forth. The EME, they have basically, you know, spread out their territorial rights and stuff. And every carnal has a vote, but yet they still politic, even though it's part of their regulars. And but their end game is still the same: influence, power, money, control. You know, same thing with the NF. NF, you know, has their delegated people throughout the ranks, and the money gets trickled. The trickle down effect doesn't really come to the low level members. That's the only difference. You know, you're out there pressured to make more money on behalf of the organization, but you're bestowed authority based upon that, because you're doing their bidding. You see the similarities? You know, they don't have really no sub-faction like you know, NR or this and that. but they have what you call associates out to the streets as far as the MA. And if you actually have people who are actually plugged in the line that have different expectations of generating that income, you know, whereas this one group may be able to hold all the money. This O has their own main bank. They have the street regiment banks and so forth. You know, it puts a lot more pressure on individuals, you know, and I think that's what kind of sets everything back between both of these groups is with the NF, there's so much paperwork and so much kites and so much information and internal investigations. Shit gets exposed too much out there. They know everybody's business. You know what I mean? That's the only thing I've always questioned is that why is so much information always having to be put on paper? I get you have to investigate it. They have their due process and so forth, but so much shit gets exposed that way. You know what I mean? Whereas the EME, they have a whole different way of how they deal with their discipline. You know what I mean? Their political push. Anyways, once again, I'm rambling on, man. This is just a quick spill. NF, Nuestra Familia, Mexican Mafia influence and how it evolved the streets. From just being low-level street gang members to now those who carry a little bit of weight out there, which each hood has a different type of independent involvement in how they assist these groups. Anyways, it's your boy Flacco. I'm gone.